Well, millions of undocumented immigrants are expected to watch U.S. President Barack Obama's immigration reform speech later tonight, with one Maryland family certain that the president has their daughter's future in his hand. Jillian Kitchener reports.
Maida and 6-year-old Heather look much like any other American mother and daughter, but looks are deceiving. Maida is an undocumented immigrant from Mexico who, with her husband, came to the United States years ago in search of work and family life. She says she walked for 2 days and 2 nights to cross the border. She was terrified then, but says it's been worth it.
More than crime, what my country is going through was economic need, which has always been there. But the opportunity of coming here was primarily to start a family and give my daughter well-being that is not available in our countries.
Like many other undocumented immigrants, Maida is eagerly awaiting President Obama's immigration reform speech, hoping he'll remove the threat of deportation for as many as 5 million people just like her.
What I ask President Barack Obama is to be as generous as possible, to include and shelter as many people as possible.
Maida says she's joined protests and rallies calling for immigration reform and says that when she loses courage, she remembers her friends who were caught and sent back. Obama's initiative would expand on a 2012 executive order that gives work permits to undocumented children brought to the country by their parents. It may not help Maida, but for Heather, who was born in the U.S., it could signal the bright future Maida is hoping for.
Republican lawmakers and immigrant advocates will pay close attention to the details that President Obama unveils in his televised address to the nation. Newly empowered Republicans are accusing him of circumventing the law, and many advocates fear that the president's plan will be too timid. Chris Chmielenski is Director of Content and Activism with NumbersUSA, and he's joining us on the phone, as well as Anastasia Tonello, who is with the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and she is here in our New York studio. Welcome to both of you to Arise America. Chris, are you there?
I am.
Okay,
yeah.
Great to have you. Anastasia, let me start with you because we understand that you've been given at least a little bit of a sneak peek of the remarks that President Obama is going to make. We are, by the way, going to carry that live later on this evening. Stay with us for that. But tell me what you've seen so far. Does this make you hopeful about a meaningful step forward in immigration reform?
It does. We're expecting the president to use his executive authority that he has, and the courts have agreed that he does possess. We're expecting some administrative actions similar to the deferred inspection for childhood arrivals that we saw a couple years ago, something similar to that to be expanded for potentially parents of U.S. citizens and green card holders. Some positive changes on the horizon for work visas and for the immigrant visas.
And let me ask you, Chris, of course, there are many, particularly Republicans in Congress, that are furious that the president is using his executive authority for immigration reform and have promised retaliation for that. Let me just ask you, first of all, do you feel like reform is necessary?
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely think that the system can be fixed and it can be tweaked. There are improvements that can be made, but you know where some of the distrust is coming from on the Republican side of the aisle in Congress, and we share some of the same concerns, is just that, and it's not just President Obama. It goes back to President Bush and prior presidents. The immigration laws that are on the books just haven't been consistently enforced by the United States government, and until those things are done, it's hard to address some of the major flaws that are within the system, because we don't know if there are, speaking on the illegal immigration issue, we don't know if our laws actually work because they just haven't been consistently enforced.
But can you be a little more specific about which laws you think are not being enforced that should be?
Well, for starters, it's illegal for anybody who does not hold a legal work permit to work in the United States. But the Pew Hispanic Center estimates that there's around 8 million illegal aliens currently working in the United States in non-agricultural jobs. So that's a law right there that has not been enforced consistently by the United States. You had a series of raids at the very, very end of George W. Bush's administration. Not that we're advocating that that was the correct way to go, but again, that's really been the only source of any sort of enforcement for that particular statute
But
over the last.
as far as
20
enforcement
years.
goes, I mean, there have to be priorities, and people working in the United States should not, in my opinion, be a priority. If you have criminal offenders, you have terrorists, you have the other higher maybe immigration violators, gang members, etc. Should we really be spending our time and effort deporting people who are working and making a contribution?
And while I agree with that to a certain extent, yes. And that is the key component of prosecutorial discretion. The key component is that the federal government simply does not have the resources to try to find 11 million illegal aliens and put them through proceedings and determine on a case-by-case basis whether or not. So the administration does, the executive branch does have to make, decisions on what are they going to emphasize, what are they not going to emphasize.
So it sounds like we'd agree that deferred action is a good idea.
I agree that prosecutorial discretion is a valuable tool that is used by all law enforcement agencies. Where I think we disagree is in the fact that there are currently 18 million Americans who want a full-time job and can't find one, and there are at least several million illegal aliens who are holding jobs in the United States that could be worked by U.S. Americans.
Chris, though, wouldn't you acknowledge, though, that many of the positions that undocumented workers, which is what most advocates would prefer that we call them, work jobs that Americans don't want to work, that in many cases undocumented workers are filling a niche, filling a need that American workers are not interested in?
Well, I mean, one could make that argument. The problem with it is that, 30, 40, 50 years ago, Americans were actually Americans were working these jobs. And the reason why we think that they're not working them now is because the employers are just paying wages that people just simply can't live off of. And if they were able to pay a working wage, a livable wage, and they gave them health care benefits and other sorts of benefits, then maybe these would be jobs that Americans would want to work.
All right. I'm going to have to interrupt you and stop the conversation. This is a very big conversation, a very volatile conversation, but we unfortunately got to leave it right there. Chris Chmielenski and Anastasia Tonello, thank you both for being here. Appreciate it.